Night dies slowly over the city, bleeding out across rooftops, drifting through alleyways, dissolving into the quiet that only criminals truly understand. It is the hour when killers sleep lightly and kings do not sleep at all. Raven DeLuca stood at the highest point of his penthouse, watching the skyline like a man who owned the darkness. The world below feared him with the same devotion they once reserved for saints. To many he was a myth, to others a rumor, but to the underworld he was law, and yet tonight, the king watched the city as if something inside him was cracking behind him in the dim corridor. Soft footsteps moved, careful, almost apologetic, like a shadow trying not to disturb a storm. Lyra moved that way always. Not because Raven frightened her, but because the world once had. She entered the room like a whisper. A thin nightgown wrapped around her slender frame, her hair loose, her eyes carrying the weight of unspoken history. A faint scar brushed the side of her collarbone, the only visible fragment of the life she had before him. She never spoke of that past. He never asked. Lyra existed in his world of shadows with a kind of quiet obedience, never loud, never demanding, always aware that the man she married was both her protector and the most dangerous creature alive. She moved beside him carefully, like approaching a lion. She didn't touch him. She always waited for him to bridge the distance first. Raven lowered his gaze to her, head tilted slightly, eyes cold and unreadable. A king carved out of the night. Lyra simply stood there, the city's reflection ghosting over her face, turning her into something more fragile, more haunting than she realized. Raven's fingers reached for her wrist, tracing the faint red ring the marriage band left when she removed it at night to sleep. His touch was possessive, careful, almost reverent. Lyra breathed in quietly. She always did that when he touched her, like she was learning the language of safety by heart. The room shifted for a moment. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy, full, alive. Lyra had been in his world for 1 year, now 1 year of hiding in his penthouse, in his private safe house, in the shadows he carved for her with his own hands. A year of a marriage no one knew existed. A union kept off every document, every registry, every camera. She was his vow, his secret, his forbidden softness, but she was also his failure, because Raven DeLuca, king of the underworld, ruler of men, judge of betrayal, could not protect her from the one thing he feared most, exposure. Lyra stepped closer, her voice soft, barely more than breath against the cold air, her hand lifted toward him, gentle, uncertain, as if she feared her own courage. But before she could touch him, before she could brush her fingers against his chest the way she always did when she needed reassurance, Raven's phone vibrated once, sharp, insistent. Wrong. He froze, because in his world, messages at this hour only meant one thing. Someone had broken a rule, someone had crossed a line, someone had found something they were not supposed to see. Lyra's eyes lifted to his face, searching for clues in his sudden stillness. Fear flickered, soft and instinctive, like the memory of old wounds reopening inside her mind. Raven unlocked the phone with a slow, precise movement. One image filled the screen. Not her face, not her body, just a hand, her hand. Delicate fingers, a white scar near the thumb, and the ring. The DeLuca crest, gleaming under low light. A picture taken secretly, invisibly, impossibly. Asterisk Raven's heart. A machine built for brutality, not emotion. Contracted. The secrecy was broken. The war had begun. Lyra watched his expression shift, watched the silent storm rising behind his eyes, and even without seeing the phone, she knew the truth. Someone had found the king's hidden bride, and the world she had been running from had finally found her again. The air in the penthouse changed first. Not the lights, not the temperature, not even Raven's expression. Just the air, tightening, sharpening, turning colder than winter's stone. Lyra felt it instantly. A shift in the atmosphere so sharp it scraped against her skin. The kind of silence that only happens right before a building collapses or a kingdom burns. Raven's grip on the phone tightened the slightest fraction, enough for the metal frame to creak. He was a man engineered to maintain control, but this scraped against the iron he used as discipline. This pierced deeper. She stepped closer with slow, calculating caution, like a small bird trying to approach a storm without being crushed by the wind. The glow of the phone's screen lit his face in a cold, surgical blue. Lyra saw the image reflected in his eyes before she saw it in hers. The ring, the scar, a single shot, precise, intimate, impossible. Lyra's breath caught in her throat, instinct tightening her body as if she expected someone to drag her away that very second. Old memories, the kind she had sealed tight, threatened to crawl up her spine like cold fingers. She swallowed them down. She had survived before. She would survive again. But she knew what this meant. Her voice trembled, not out of fear of Raven, but fear of the world that hunted her long before she ever wore his ring. Someone found me. Raven didn't answer. His silence was sharper than a blade. Lyra watched him absorb the image like a calculation, like a war map. He zoomed in on the shot, the lighting angle, the shadows around her hand, the reflection on the metal. All of it told him one thing. This wasn't taken by accident. This was surveillance, deliberate, patient. Someone had been watching her, watching them. Longer than he realized, his jaw tensed, tendons shifting like steel cables coiling beneath the skin. A man who commanded armies with a single gesture now stood perfectly still, but the storm inside him gripped the room by the throat. Lyra swallowed again. The world outside felt like 1,000 eyes pressing through the glass. She took a step back, not away from him, but toward the safety of the wall, instinct pushing her to put structure behind her spine. The fear was quiet but real, pulsing beneath her ribs. Her life before Raven had taught her one thing. Once someone finds your shadow, they come for your body next. Raven lifted his eyes from the screen and turned toward her, slowly, purposefully. The king emerging through the darkness. Lyra braced herself, not for cruelty, but for the intensity of his attention. Raven's gaze hit like a physical force. Strong. Consuming. Too sharp for someone like her, someone who preferred invisibility. He stepped forward, one step, then another, until her back pressed lightly against the wall, not trapped, shielded. He placed his hand beside her head, not touching her, simply claiming the space near her, anchoring her between his body and the cold glass. For the first time in months, she saw something in him break through the ice, not anger. Fear, a fear he would never voice but couldn't fully hide, not from her. His shadow fell over her as he leaned closer, lowering his forehead until it almost touched hers. His breath brushed her lips, quiet, controlled, but laced with something she had only seen once before. The night he saved her. The night he chose her. The night he married her to keep her hidden. In his silence, she heard the truth. They found my weakness. They found you. Lyra inhaled shakily, her fingers curling against her gown. Not in panic. In resolve. Because if someone was coming for her, then they were coming for Raven too. And she would not let the world destroy the only man who ever gave her a name worth living for. Outside the penthouse, the city trembled beneath distant sirens and the low hum of a world that did not know storm clouds were already gathering. Inside the room, Raven finally spoke, but only one sentence, delivered like a death sentence carved in stone. They know. The lights flickered. The kingdom had been breached, and the hunt for the Shadow Bride had officially begun. The message traveled faster than bullets, faster than rumors, faster than fear itself. It moved through encrypted channels, through the dark web, through private syndicate servers and hidden networks buried beneath layers of criminal secrecy. Men who swore loyalty in blood. Men who swore loyalty in money. Men who swore loyalty in nothing at all. They all saw it. The image. The hand. The scar. The ring. Not a face. Not a voice. But enough. Enough to crack the underworld wide open. Down in the old industrial district, where abandoned warehouses rotted against the river, a group of mercenaries watched the leaked image flash across their devices. The men stared silently, because even they knew this wasn't just a photograph. It was an invitation, a declaration, a weakness. A king who was never supposed to have one now did. And that meant everyone had a chance to become powerful.
Or dead.
In an underground nightclub stained with neon and smoke, cartel lieutenants paused their conversation mid-sentence. The music throbbed in the background, but nobody heard it. The air thickened as they realized the impossible. Raven DeLuca, untouchable, inhuman, unbreakable, was protecting someone. A woman.
A wife.
A secret he hid so deeply it became myth. Until now. In a dim apartment far across the city, a lone hacker leaned back in her chair, fingers trembling with thrill. She didn't leak the photo, but she knew who did. And she knew what it meant. If she played her cards right, she could sell information worth more than gold, more than weapons, more than territory. Information worth the king's heart. She smiled, because empires fall when secrets rise. But while the underworld vibrated with hunger, power, speculation, and ambition, one man had already moved beyond speculation. Nero Fatus. The name itself carried weight, like an infection whispering through the dark. He sat in a hidden chamber deep beneath an old cathedral, surrounded by men too scared to speak out of turn. Nero watched the image appear on his screen. His eyes, cold, reptilian, narrowed. So, he murmured, tracing the scar on Lyra's hand with a thoughtful finger. The ghost girl lives. His men stiffened. A few took involuntary steps back. Because Nero didn't speak of her as a stranger. He spoke of her as unfinished business. He leaned back slowly, his smile cut from cruelty so quiet it sounded like mercy. Find her, he ordered. 3 words.
Soft. Deadly.
Absolute. Bring me the shadow bride alive. High above the city, Raven DeLuca's penthouse was no longer still. In the seconds after he whispered, "They know," the building hardened around them, security systems locking, elevators freezing, steel shutters sliding into place. Not panic. Preparation. Raven stepped away from Lyra for only a moment, long enough to activate a series of silent alarms embedded into the marble walls. Red lines slid across control panels. Surveillance feeds flickered alive. But when he turned back to her, something fierce flashed behind his eyes. Not rage. Rage was familiar, predictable, manageable. This was possession sharpened into war. Lyra stood against the glass wall, the city lights glowing behind her like a constellation of burning stars. Her breathing was steady, but her hands trembled just enough for the fabric of her gown to quiver. She was processing the same truth he already knew. The hunt had begun. Not tomorrow. Not in hours.
Now.
Raven approached her again, step silent, posture rigid, gaze locked on her as if he were memorizing every detail, every line, every molecule, preparing himself for a storm even he wasn't sure he could contain. Lyra watched him with wide, searching eyes. Not because she doubted him, but because she understood the weight she placed on his shoulders. The underworld would not attack his empire first. They would come for her. The secret he bled to protect. The woman he married in the dark. The name he hid deeper than his sins. She inhaled, voice barely a whisper inside the fortress of steel and silence. What happens now? Raven's answer was not gentle. It was not comforting. It was a vow made of fire. Now, he murmured, stepping close enough for his shadow to swallow hers. I start a war. Michael Palomi. 12:20 p.m., 1 hour ago.
To me.
The city didn't wait. It never does when blood is promised. The moment Raven's vow left his lips, the night outside seemed to shift, an invisible tremor rippling across the skyline. Not something ordinary eyes could see, but Raven felt it. Predators sense other predators long before the world notices teeth. Lyra stood still, spine tight against the window, watching his silhouette as he crossed the room with lethal precision. Every movement was controlled, strategic. Not a man panicking. A man preparing to strike. He tapped a security panel hidden behind a painting. The walls hummed as the penthouse lockdown deepened, steel reinforcements sliding into place, electromagnetic barriers activating, detection fields stretching across 3 floors. It should have felt safe.
It didn't.
Because Raven wasn't fortifying the building. He was fortifying her. Downstairs, in the private garage carved beneath the tower, the first alarm tripped. A silent vibration registered on Raven's wristwatch. Lyra didn't hear it, but Raven did. His body went still. Not slowly. Not gradually. Instantly. A shift so sharp it felt like gravity bent around him. Lyra saw his posture change and felt terror coil low in her stomach, not because she feared him, but because she feared what was coming for him. "What is it?" her voice whispered into the thick air. Raven didn't answer with words. He simply tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing, listening to something only a predator would hear at this distance. And then, a metallic echo shuddered through the foundation.
Boom.
Muffled.
Low.
Controlled. Not an explosion. A breach. Someone had forced entrance into the garage level. Lyra's heart thudded, her pulse tightening in her throat. The room seemed to shrink around her, every surface turning colder, harder, sharper. Raven's jaw flexed. The expression he wore now, she had never seen it before, to coldness deeper than ice, darker than rage, sharper than death. He turned to her slowly. "Stay here," he murmured, a command wrapped in velvet steel. She opened her mouth to protest, but the lights flickered. Just once, a warning. Lyra froze. Raven took a step toward her, hand lifting to press 2 fingers lightly against her jaw, an unspoken vowed, a silent promise, a touch meant to anchor her to him for one breath more. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator, but it refused to open under lockdown. Good. He didn't need it. Instead, he approached the reinforced door that led to the emergency stairwell, entered a passcode, placed his hand on a biometric scanner, and allowed himself through. The last thing Lyra saw was the way his shadow disappeared around the corner. Large, commanding, shaped like a man prepared to become a monster for her. Garage level. 36 floors below. Raven descended the stairs soundlessly, each step an echo of coming violence. He reached the final landing just as something slammed against the far metal gate. A heavy, deliberate impact. He inhaled once, slow, controlled. Then the next hit came, stronger, accompanied by the screech of bending steel. Whoever was here wasn't subtle. They wanted him to know. Good. Raven stepped into the garage, shadows spilling at his feet like dark water. The air was cold, the concrete thick with silence, until a shape angled itself from behind a black SUV. He recognized the silhouette immediately. Not Nero's men, not cartel fodder, not amateurs, the retrieval unit. Highly trained, professional, expensive, sent for one mission. Extract the Shadow Bride. 3 of them stepped forward, faces covered, weapons raised, movements in perfect formation. They thought they were hunters. They were wrong. Raven didn't speak, didn't warn, didn't negotiate. He moved fast. Enough that the first man didn't even raise his gun before Raven's hand cracked across his throat, collapsing him against the hood of a car. The second fired, but Raven was already gone, sliding behind him, snapping the weapon from his grasp, and driving it into the concrete where the man's wrist used to be. The third hesitated for half a second too long. Raven's elbow hit his jaw with a sound like breaking stone. The man crumpled. Silence swallowed the garage again, broken only by the distant hum of Raven's breath. He looked down at the 3 bodies, chest rising calm and steady. Not a scratch on him, but something tugged at the edge of his attention, a small device clipped to one man's belt, blinking slowly to tracker, sending live data. Someone was watching his every movement. Raven crushed it beneath his boot, and somewhere above him, on the 36th floor, Lyra felt a cold breeze sweep across her shoulders, though the windows were sealed. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "They're coming for me." The penthouse had never felt this quiet, not even in the early hours of dawn, when the world outside was half asleep and the city held its breath. This silence was different. Heavy.
Thick.
It clung to Lyra's skin like cold mist. She stood alone in the center of the room, her fingers twisting the fabric of her gown. Every floor beneath her felt like it was shifting, reorganizing, preparing for war beneath her bare feet. The walls hummed softly, an indication that Raven had activated every defensive protocol hidden in the building's architecture. Lyra had always known this place was fortified, but tonight, it felt like she was living inside a bunker disguised as a luxury home. She wandered slowly toward the panoramic glass windows, staring down at the sprawling city lights. Somewhere down there, Raven was moving through shadows, leaving fear and destruction in his wake. Not for territory, not for control, not for power. For her. That truth pressed against her chest like a hand, heavy, unfamiliar, terrifying. She hugged her arms around herself, exhaling a shaky breath. Her mind tried to stay calm, tried to believe Raven would take care of everything, tried to believe she was still safe, but safety had never lasted long in her life. Not before Raven. Not before the shadows he saved her from. Not even long before she ever met him. The memory crept up her spine, cold, sharp, uninvited. She tried to push it down, she failed. Years earlier, darkness tasted like copper. Lyra remembered that first. How the air in the locked cellar always smelled of rust and old blood, how it coated the back of her throat, how it made every breath feel stolen. Back then, she was not Lyra. She didn't have a name, just a number, just a purpose someone else assigned to her. The men who kept her there spoke in low voices, always in the same rhythms, the same tones of cruel amusement, voices that made her skin crawl. And then one night, the worst of them walked in Nero Vatus. She remembered his boots clicking across the concrete. She remembered how he placed a hand under her chin, lifting her face deliberately, as if inspecting a piece of merchandise. He had looked into her eyes, observed her fear, and smiled. He always smiled at fear. Lyra shivered in the present, arms tightening around her ribs. She hated remembering him, hated remembering the cellar, hated remembering the nights when the only light was from a single bulb that buzzed like insects crawling under her skin. She dragged in a deep breath, trying to exhale the memory before it consumed her again. But then, another memory surfaced. Point one she could never suppress. The night Raven found her. The flames, the gunfire, the sound of doors being kicked open, the metallic roar of weapons shattering chains. The screams of the men who once owned her. She remembered lying on the floor, barely conscious, bleeding and desperate to disappear. And then Raven walked in, not like a savior, not like a hero, not like the stories. He entered like the most dangerous man alive, and the only safe place she had ever known. His eyes had found her instantly. He had lifted her carefully, as if she were something fragile, something breakable, something worth protecting instead of destroying. She didn't understand that moment then. She barely understood it now. She only knew one truth. The man who saved her that night is the same man now ready to burn the entire city to keep her out of Nero Vatus's hands. Lyra blinked away the tears that threatened to gather. She had run from her past for so long she forgot what it felt like to stop running. But now someone had forced her past back into the present. She turned away from the window, pacing restlessly across the room. Her steps were soft but frantic, her breath tightening with every passing minute. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the silver necklace Raven gave her, a small pendant she wore every day. She clutched it like a lifeline, because deep inside her chest, the truth echoed. Nero wasn't coming for Raven. He was coming for her. And if he got her, the world Raven built would crumble. For the first time since she became Raven DeLuca's hidden bride, Lyra whispered a thought she never allowed herself to speak. I should have never let him save me. The thought hurt, like betrayal made of glass cutting her from the inside, but she believed it, because she knew something Raven didn't. She wasn't just a former captive. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the only witness left alive who could destroy Nero Vatus, and Nero wanted to erase that witness forever. Far below, in the depths of the private garage, Raven finished wiping blood from his hands with a stolen cloth. He stood over the unconscious bodies, breathing steady, mind razor-sharp. He didn't fear enemies. He didn't fear war. He didn't fear death. He feared something else entirely. Lyra's silence, because he could feel it, a shift in her energy, as real as a storm forming on the horizon. She was remembering something she never told him, something she believed would break him. Raven lifted his head slowly. eyes narrowing. Did I end that moment? He knew one thing with lethal certainty. The true threat wasn't the men trying to breach his building. It was the truth Lyra had buried so deep even he hadn't found it yet. The elevator doors opened with a low, metallic sigh. Not the glossy elevator that guests used, but the private lift only Raven had access to, the one that didn't appear on building maps. The one built to move like a ghost between floors. Raven stepped out, dressed in shadows and the scent of danger that clung to him like a second skin. Blood no longer stained him. He had cleaned it off with soldier-like precision, but the violence still lingered around him in the way it always did after a fight. Quiet, controlled, lethal. The penthouse lights dimmed automatically as he crossed the threshold, sensing the biometric signature that identified him as the building's master. But even with the system confirming his return, the space felt wrong, empty, too quiet. Lyra always sensed him before he arrived. Her breath always changed, her pulse always reached for him in the room's silence. Her presence was always a soft, trembling warmth waiting in the shadows. But tonight, the silence was hollow. Raven's steps slowed. He scanned the room with a predator's gaze, not looking for danger, but for her. The curtains shifted slightly in the artificial breeze. The city lights painted the floor in fractured geometry. The security panels pulsed in red intervals. But Lyra was nowhere. His chest tightened, just slightly, an emotion so rare for him it was almost foreign. Then he saw her, not hiding, not running, standing by the far window, head bowed, arms wrapped around her own body like she was afraid the air might shatter her. Raven moved toward her instantly, silent, precise, the nightmare the underworld feared, and the man she relied on without question. Though tonight that reliance felt thin, Lyra didn't look up when he reached her. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe loudly enough for him to read her mood the way he always did. She just stood there, spine trembling, heart beating too fast. He stopped behind her, close enough to feel the faint shiver running through her bones. Lyra. Her name left him quietly, a sound he rarely allowed himself, a whisper he only gave her. But she didn't turn, not this time, not tonight. Instead, she exhaled a breath that sounded like surrender, the kind of surrender born not from weakness but from guilt. Raven, she whispered, voice fragile, her fingers tightened around her elbows, holding herself together. I remember everything. Raven froze, not visibly, not dramatically, but inwardly. A tectonic shift, because he knew what that meant. Her past wasn't just waking up. It was clawing its way back into the present. He stepped closer until his chest almost brushed her back. His shadow swallowed hers, his presence wrapped around her like a shield forged in fire. What did you remember? He asked, tone low, controlled. But Lyra heard the tension beneath it, the fear he would never admit out loud. Her breath shook. Why Nero wants me, she said, voice barely audible. Why he won't stop. Why he'll never stop. Raven's eyes hardened. Lyra swallowed, fighting tears. I wasn't just anyone in that cellar, she whispered. I wasn't just another captive. Raven's jaw flexed once, slow, dangerous. Lyra finally turned to face him. Her eyes were red. Her lips trembled. Her past bled through her expression like bruises no one could touch. Raven. I was the one who escaped first. Her voice cracked. I was the only one who ever escaped Nero alive. The words hit him like a blade to the sternum, not because he couldn't handle the truth, but because he understood its weight instantly. Nero didn't want to punish Raven. Nero wanted to erase the one witness who could destroy him. Raven's hands rose slowly, settling on her shoulders, not to restrain, not to command, but to anchor her. You survived, Raven said quietly, not a question, a statement, a recognition. Lyra's tears slipped free. I ran. I hid. I changed my name. I tried to disappear. But Nero, he never forgot. He never forgave. And now, her voice broke completely. He'll burn the world down to finish what he started. Raven pulled her into his chest, not gently, not roughly, just completely, as if he was claiming her all over again. His voice murmured into her hair, dark and certain. He won't reach you. The lights flickered again. The second warning. Enemies were climbing the building now. The war had truly begun. Raven lifted his head, eyes cold, deadly, resolute, and in a voice carved from iron, "Lyra, stay behind me." Because tonight, the king would burn the city before he let anyone take his bride. The war ended in silence, and oh gunfire, and oh screams, and oh final explosion tearing through the night. Just silence. Deep, heavy, absolute. The kind of silence that only happens when the most dangerous man alive stands over the corpse of his greatest enemy. Nero Vatus lay motionless on the marble floor of the ruined safe house. His final breath long vanished into the dust-filled air. The empire he tried to resurrect collapsed with him. His plans, his men, his obsessions, scattered like ashes in a storm. Raven DeLuca stood above him, shoulders rising and falling with calm, controlled breaths. His knuckles were bruised, blood splattered across the sleeves of his shirt, but his expression remained icy, composed. Because this victory, this slaughter, was never about rage. It was about protection. Behind him, Lyra watched with wide, trembling eyes. She wasn't afraid of what he'd done. She was afraid of what he'd become for her. Raven turned slowly, meeting her gaze across the broken room. For a moment, neither moved. The world around them paused, the flickering lights, the drifting dust, the hissing crackle of dying flames. Then Raven walked toward her. Not like a king, not like a conqueror, not like the ruthless ruler the underworld bowed to in fear. He moved like a man approaching the only person who could fracture his armor. Lyra's breath hitched as he reached her. His hand rose, slowly, tracing the line of her cheek with the back of his fingers, a touch lighter than the shadows that once hid her. "It's over," he murmured, not triumphant, not relieved, simply certain. Lyra's lips parted, her voice trembling. "Raven, people will come. New enemies, new threats." He cut her off with a quiet shake of his head. "No," his thumb brushed her jaw. "They will learn." "Learn what?" she whispered. Raven leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, his voice slipping into the quiet space between their breaths. "That my queen will walk in daylight." Lyra froze. It felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. He had never called her that before, not out loud, not with meaning, not with the full weight of his name behind it. Queen. Not wife in hiding, not secret in shadows, not ghost bride. Queen. Raven slid his hand behind her neck, pulling her into his chest. Her fingers grasped the front of his shirt, desperate, overwhelmed, alive. "You're not a secret anymore," he whispered into her hair. "You're not a target, not a memory, not something the world must not see." He pulled back just enough for her to see the fire in his eyes. "You are the power beside me." Lyra's breath shook, then broke. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they weren't from fear. For the first time in years, she felt something she once believed she didn't deserve: freedom. Raven took her hand in his, intertwining their fingers tightly. His grip was firm, grounding, reverent. He led her out through the shattered doorway, past the men who had fought beside him, past the wreckage of Nero's final stand, past the shadows that had once been the only home she knew. Outside, dawn was rising, soft, gold spilling over the battered skyline. The first sunlight she had seen without fear in years. Raven stepped beside her, their shoulders brushing. He looked at her like a man seeing his future, not his mistake. "Walk with me," he said softly. Lyra inhaled sharply. Then she stepped forward, into the light, her fingers still laced tightly with his, and the underworld, watching from rooftops, alleys, safe houses, and screens. Understood a new truth that morning. Raven DeLuca was no longer the king in the shadows. He had a queen now, and for her, he would rebuild his empire. Not hidden, not hunted, but in daylight and undeniable power. The Shadow Bride was no more. She walked beside the Mafia king now, as the queen the world would learn to fear.